I want to speak a little bit about the sociology of religions because we're talking about societies, communities, and whether we are devotees or non-devotees, you know those wonderful words, karmi, jnani, yogi, extraterrestrial. So whatever we are, there are certain laws which tend to govern human behavior, whether it's individually as psychology or as a group in the sense of sociology. And Prabhupada says, actually in his purport to the Bhagavatam 1.5.22, that human society achieves perfection by engaging the sciences, by approaching things rationally. In fact, in Krishna consciousness, of course. We should also remember that the Upanishad, Sri Upanishad, which is the only Upanishad that is actually directly part of one of the four Vedas. There are four Vedas, Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, Atharva, and actually the Upanishad is the only Upanishad that's part of the text. It's part of the Yajurveda. So the Upanishad says that Vidyang cha just tad vedo bhayang saha. Very interesting. This is a very surprising statement. The Upanishad says that one should understand both, literally what it says, one should understand knowledge and ignorance. Vidyang cha vidyam. And knowledge and ignorance, we also have to understand that knowledge, Prabhupada takes it to mean the spiritual realm and the material realm, because sometimes the material world is simply called avidya, the ignorance. And yet we have to understand the world. And then the Upanishad says, avidya ya, by literally unknowledge, the non-connaissance, by this avidya, or by knowledge of the material world, one crosses over death. It's very interesting. The Vedas say you don't cross over death by knowledge of the spiritual, you cross over death by knowledge of the material. And then vidyayamrita mashnute, by spiritual knowledge one enjoys eternal life, immortal life. So what is this about? Well, for one thing, if you're going to give yourself to Krishna, then you have to know who you are. And you have to be able to separate, like, which emotions, which beliefs are simply my conditioned nature as a human being, and what are my purely spiritual feelings or attitudes or beliefs and so on. Anyway, without going too much into this, hold that for me. It's not yours, just hold it. Never give away my darlings. Anyway, so in the case of understanding the relationship between ISKCON and other Gaudiya Vaishnava groups, rather than just making mutual moral accusations like you are sectarian or you have deviated or you're this or you're that, which obviously now after so many years it doesn't really help. So it helps to keep people in your group from going to the other group maybe, but it doesn't help at resolving things. So another assumption, I have an assumption here, which is that there is significant positive value in unity. There's significant positive value in unity, that somehow or other, if in some reasonable way the Gaudiya Vaishnavas could unite, and ultimately I've thought many times even all the Vaishnavas, Sri Vaishnavas.
Je pense que tout le monde devrait couper son téléphone, oui, tout le monde, parce que ça va arriver 10 fois au moins.
Yeah.
To cut off.
Bien sûr.
Yeah.
So, because if there was not significant positive value in unity, if we didn't believe there was something very important, a value that we could achieve by greater unity, then this would simply be an academic discussion, which of course for me would be interesting. But the real point here is that we're trying to achieve something. As we all know, we are preaching to the world that if you accept Krishna, this will bring peace to the world. So if the Vaishnavas don't have peace among themselves, it's, to say the least, embarrassing and makes us look like hypocrites. So not only in terms of our public image, but in terms of, the strength that comes with unity and in the sense of being authentic. As Vaishnavas, I think there's a natural desire to promote unity. And since at the present time, in many parts of the world, including France, there's not a high level of unity, I thought, why not talk about it? Despite what some people think about me, I think I probably cannot make the situation worse. Some people think I can make any situation worse, but... So the I want to tell the history not with the desire to criticize or attack anyone, but because it is the history. The history, of course, begins with Prabhupada. Actually, the history begins before Prabhupada came to the West. Before there was an ISKCON, there was a Gaudiya Math. We all know the story. It was a united group. And after Bhaktisiddhanta's passing, it went on for a while as a strong, united group. And then because of internal conflict, it literally disintegrated into smaller groups, which is something which happens a lot. If you study the history of religions, it's not uncommon that happens. Anyway, I won't go into all the sociology, religion, and all that, but it's well known to scholars that it's a common thing that happens. Not always, but it happens a lot for various reasons that are easy to identify. In the case of the Gaudiya Math, which of course was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's institution, Prabhupada identified a specific cause of the disintegration, which was the attempt to establish a successor acharya rather than form a collegial body. And so throughout my life in Krishna consciousness, I have accepted Prabhupada's version of it. I've heard other historical theories and other people's testimony about what actually happened. But based on the preponderance of evidence, it seems like Prabhupada's statement is correct, that that's actually what happened. So then Prabhupada came to America, and interestingly, he wanted very much to make his movement part of the Gaudiya Math. And of course, this is all documented. Prabhupada wrote letters, and those letters are still there. So Prabhupada wrote, when he first came to New York, and he was thinking, oh my God, now what? He thought, well, we should make this a Gaudiya Math project. And so he wrote letters to, I think, probably several branches of Gaudiya Math saying that there's a great opportunity here. There are people here interested in Krishna consciousness. Previous to that, the only experience the Gaudiya Math had with international preaching was Bhaktisiddhanta's attempt. He sent some of his disciples to London, and it didn't really work out, and they eventually came back. There was also a German devotee, as we know, that famous German disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta, who was in India anyway. But so after that attempt by Bhaktisiddhanta, who passed away in 1936, and of course Prabhupada came in 1965, so about 30 years passed. And there's no evidence that the Gaudiya Math made any attempt in those 30 years to reach an international audience or an audience outside of India. And when Prabhupada came, he wanted to make it a Gaudiya Math center. And he asked for their support. He said, you could send some brahmacharis, or maybe you could help financially. If we get a building in New York, there's an extraordinary opportunity here. And perhaps the people in the Gaudiya Math were remembering the unsuccessful trip to London. Maybe they thought that it would not be a wise use of their resources. It could also be that if we look sociologically at what the Gaudiya Math became by the year 1965 or 66, it had divided into not even a group, it was just many different maths that really had no administrative connection between them. They were all, of course, they knew each other and they were all the same religion, but there was no real official or administrative connection between them. And so the model that arose that existed at that time was a model in which for every Gaudiya Math there was one acharya. And at that point Prabhupada was a sannyasi and a senior disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta, and people knew that he was learned and an excellent preacher. And so, just thinking now as a historian, which is my professional field, but thinking as a historian, it seems to me that when the Gaudiya Math leaders received these letters from Prabhupada, Prabhupada was asking them to do something for which they had no precedent. Something which was just not part of their world. There had been a united Gaudiya Math under Bhaktisiddhanta, but when Bhaktisiddhanta passed away, you had all these little maths. Each one was completely independent. I mean, legally, in every way, each one was its own island. And so the idea of two acharyas, because Prabhupada is a sannyasi, and as a senior disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta, clearly would act as a guru. In fact, Prabhupada had already initiated one disciple in Jhansi, I believe. I don't know if he met that person in Jhansi, but he actually had to decide one disciple before he came to America. So he was clearly a guru. And everyone, in the Gaudiya Math, there was a very high level of sensitivity and awareness of what you might call power relationships. This is something that Prabhupada talked about a lot. So the idea of having any Gaudiya Math group that accepted Prabhupada's offer and said, okay, we'll work together, would have been entering into territory that was very strange to them. Like now that Bhaktisiddhanta is not physically here, how do you have two acharyas? How do you have two gurus in the same institution? And I believe that was undoubtedly something that concerned them, and they decided not to help Prabhupada. That was their decision. So Prabhupada was alone. So really, ISKCON was plan B. ISKCON was plan B. It wasn't plan A. Another point is that even ISKCON with all of us, as Prabhupada used to say, you young American boys and girls, and then French and from everywhere else, that was also plan B. ISKCON was plan B, and then having an ISKCON the way it turned out, that was also plan B. That was plan B of plan B, because if you look at Prabhupada, even before he came to America, his conception, his vision of what his movement would be, or his mission was, that he would somehow persuade important people, famous people, great charitable foundations. For example, when he first came to New York, he wrote to the Carnegie Foundation, he wrote to the Rockefeller Foundation, I think the Ford Foundation, he wrote to the United Nations. So we have to remember Prabhupada was born in 1896. And Prabhupada lived the first 51 years of his life. By the time you're 51, you kind of, you are who you are. And Prabhupada lived the first 51 years of his life as a subject of the British monarchy. As a subject of the British Empire. Where there was there were real kings and queens. And so Prabhupada's conception was, as Krishna says in the Gita, yad yad acharati shreshtas, whatever the great person does, common people follow. So if you look at all the letters that Prabhupada sent, these many letters that he sent, to world leaders, to cultural leaders, both in India and then later when he came to America, his logic, his arguments are all based on this conception that the world follows great people. And that's actually there are different approaches to historiography, the writing of history. And, for example, there's the Marxist interpretation of history. And there's also the sort of the great man theory of history, or the great person, the idea that there are certain very powerful individuals, and they're the ones that kind of shape history. So Prabhupada was kind of operating under that model of historical analysis, that if we can somehow attract great people, important people, great foundations, that they will then give Krishna consciousness to the common people. So that was Prabhupada's thinking, and you see it practically in every letter he wrote to important people. That if you accept this, others will accept it. You are an important person. And no one really responded. So if you look at the lives of great people like Prabhupada, or great, you could say, movie stars or singers or even politicians, there's often the idea that these people just sort of went to the top. But actually, you find in the lives of successful people, usually many, many, many failed attempts until finally something works. And in a sense, the great people are the ones that didn't give up. So Prabhupada came to America. He was writing to world leaders, but ended up in Butler, Pennsylvania. And with all due respect to Butler, Pennsylvania, it is Butler, Pennsylvania. And there's a reason why you would never have heard of it if you didn't know about Prabhupada's life. So eventually Prabhupada went to New York. He realized, I don't think the world spiritual revolution is going to begin here in Butler, Pennsylvania. I have a disciple from Butler, Pennsylvania. So every time I mention this, I don't want to offend her, but it's a nice town. So Prabhupada went to New York. And he tried to preach. He was with Dr. Mishra, and then he realized this is not going to work, so he left Dr. Mishra. I mean, he kept trying this and that. I mean, before he came, there was Jhansi, there was his Back to Godhead sheet in Delhi, and nothing was really working. He kept trying and kept trying. So finally, he went to New York, and then young people started following him and listening to him, and then actually giving their lives, and they wanted to be disciples. And then Prabhupada realized that this was Krishna's plan. It's not going to be about attracting famous, important people, world leaders. It's all of us. And so that was, as I said, it was kind of like plan B of plan B. And so again, Prabhupada reached out to the Gaudiya Math. He wanted to work with them. They didn't want to work with him. And so he formed ISKCON. The next really important event in terms of Prabhupada's relationship with the Gaudiya Math, because it's very important to understand Prabhupada's relationship with the Gaudiya Math before we talk about our relationship. Prabhupada had a disciple who was well known as a great kirtan leader, Achyutananda, who had to leave America because he was drafted by the army and did not want to go to Vietnam for hopefully obvious reasons. So he went to India. He went to India so that he wouldn't end up in Vietnam. And because there was no ISKCON movement in India, like nothing, so Prabhupada made an arrangement, or somehow an arrangement was made, that he would stay with some of Prabhupada's godbrothers. And so he did. He stayed with the godbrothers. And what I'm about to say next is not my opinion. This is based on a lot of evidence. And it's in Prabhupada's biographies. It's just basically what happened. What happened is that the godbrothers of Prabhupada, that Prabhupada was trusting to take care of his disciple who had to leave America, somehow, in Prabhupada's words, contaminated him. And the specific contamination was an idea that actually still exists. And that was that even though Prabhupada took the name Prabhupada, which many of his godbrothers thought was offensive, and how can you do that? So the idea that they told Achyutananda was that The real acharya is not your Prabhupada, it's not A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. He's just sort of has stolen this title. And the real acharya is Bhaktisiddhanta. And therefore, ISKCON, with all of its growing assets, properties and devotees, really belongs to the Gaudiya Math. And therefore, the right thing is to take ISKCON and give it back to the Gaudiya Math and take it away from Prabhupada. And the way that Prabhupada discovered this is interesting. He discovered it on the cover of a book. At that time, there was no BBT, there was an ISKCON press. And Prabhupada later made BBT as a separate corporation because he was afraid. He saw that sometimes ISKCON got involved in legal troubles in different countries, and he wanted to make sure that ISKCON's legal troubles did not endanger the publication of his books. And therefore he formed a separate corporation. But in 1970, it was simply ISKCON Press. And the person in charge of ISKCON Press was Brahmananda Swami. And he worked with his brother, younger brother, Gargamuni Swami. They published a book, which I think was Easy Journey to Other Planets. They reprinted it, Easy Journey to Other Planets. And on the cover of the book, it did not say that the author was His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, because that's what was on all of Prabhupada's books. On this book, it simply said A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. No Prabhupada, no His Divine Grace. The reason is because Achyutananda and Brahmananda were both from New York. They were friends. They joined, around the same time. And so somehow this idea that Prabhupada had usurped or stolen this title of Prabhupada, and the real Prabhupada was Bhaktisiddhanta, and therefore all of ISKCON with its properties and devotees really should be given or taken by the Gaudiya Math. Somehow this idea had spread to Brahmananda, and therefore they published that book. So when Prabhupada saw the book cover, he understood everything. In order to understand this, you have to realize that in India, there is a very sophisticated and complex culture which is very concerned with, you could say almost obsessed with, rank and position and hierarchy. In fact, India probably has the most severe social hierarchy of any country in the world today. And that's basically the conclusion of social scientists, the United Nations, and so on. So this sort of, this deep concern, practically this obsession with rank and everything. And so, for example, when Prabhupada first went back to India as the conquering hero, because he'd come to the West, he built up this great Hare Krishna movement, which was also 1970, by the way. This is the same year that book came out. When Prabhupada flew into Calcutta, his godbrother, who was in charge of the Calcutta mission, did not come to greet him. Instead, he sent a brahmachari. Prabhupada took that as a type of insult, as a type of offense to show you're not as important as you think you are. Now, Prabhupada's Western disciples totally didn't get it, like, oh, we're here at the airport, there's a brahmachari, flower garlands, maybe some Mahaprasadam sweets. The American disciples totally didn't get it. But Prabhupada said that's what this means in our culture. So again, this is the same year, 1970. So Prabhupada found the people who were involved in this conspiracy, as he called it, and he did a few things. Number one, he expelled these sannyasis who had been involved. He expelled them from ISKCON. Of course, later he accepted them back. He expelled them from ISKCON, and then there's a very famous scene. This is all in the Prabhupada Lilamrita. I mean, these things really happened. Prabhupada called two disciples of his who he trusted, who he thought were still loyal to him, because there was actually an issue of loyalty. And the two disciples he called were Bhagavan, who you may have heard of from France, and Rupanuga. That was the pre-Europe Bhagavan. And so he told them, there is fire in the house. Those were his words. There is fire in the house. And he said, you must get me out of here. Prabhupada, you see, you have to remember, this is real history. You have to remember that Prabhupada knew that his guru had survived an assassination attempt. And at that time, Prabhupada actually was concerned about his own personal safety. Now, for almost all of Prabhupada's disciples, they knew nothing about this. For example, in 1970, I was a brahmachari, and I knew nothing about it. I was the sort of vice president, Sankirtan leader, and temple commander of what was then the biggest temple in ISKCON, which was in Boston, because it had the ISKCON press. And so I had no idea. I was just, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So I had no idea what was going on. And Prabhupada actually was feared for his personal safety and what was going on. He didn't know how wide this conspiracy was. And again, these are historical facts. I'm not, you may notice I'm not using any adjectives like terrible, evil, wicked. I'm just telling you the facts. This conspiracy, of course, emanated from some of the branches of the Gaudiya Math. So Prabhupada said, you must take me out of here. There's fire in the house. So then they suggested, these disciples, well, we can go to New York. He said, no, the fire is there also. Because Ramananda was in New York and Gargamuni was in Los Angeles, these two brothers. So then they said, well, we'll go to London, we'll go to Europe. And Prabhupada said, no, the fire is also there. You take me, I have to get farther away. And that's when Prabhupada decided, I'll go back to India. Prabhupada actually went back to India because he felt in India, he kind of had what they call in English the home court advantage, like a soccer team, you're playing in your own stadium. So Prabhupada felt more comfortable that in India, I know what to do. Now, there's a very poignant moment when Prabhupada went to say goodbye to Rukmini Dwarkadish in Los Angeles, because Prabhupada at that point really had decided to make his world headquarters in Los Angeles, and he had no intention of going back to India. For Prabhupada at that point, India is the place that rejected him. I mean, he tried very, very hard to spread his movement in India. He was rejected everywhere he went. No one really took him seriously. And so from Prabhupada's point of view, c'est fini. That's it. Game over in India. And he thought, and that's what, for example, in his pranam mantra, Paschatya Desha Tarine. Prabhupada wrote his own pranam mantra. Who am I? I'm the person that tries to save the Western countries. That's how Prabhupada defined himself. So when he had to go back to India, there was a very touching moment when he went to say goodbye to the deities, because he had thought, this is my home now. I live in L.A. This is my world headquarters. In fact, in 1970, Prabhupada sent a letter out to everyone saying that from now on, I don't want to travel anymore. I'm going to retire in Los Angeles. I'm going to write books, and all the leaders from around the world can come and see me. And Prabhupada actually called for me to come and see. I was just a brahmachari, but he was really happy about something I was doing. So he called for me to come and see him, and he had all these leaders. I mean, not all the leaders, but there were maybe like a dozen leaders from different parts of the world. And after the morning class, Prabhupada would, like he always did, he would go take breakfast, take a nap, and then if you've been to New Dwarka, now it's all the deity rooms, but then there was this real beautiful darshan room. And actually Prabhupada had a plan then, which didn't last so long, but his plan was that no one would come to his room. He would just write books, and he would come down every morning to the darshan room and just receive whoever wanted to see him. And that's where, of course, I went there to see Prabhupada. And so there was a half circle of leaders from different parts of the world, and he would go one by one to each leader and talk to them about their project and about their country and so on. And so Prabhupada, that was it. Prabhupada was not going to travel. He was definitely not going to India. He lived in Los Angeles. He declared it his world headquarters. And then a few months later, he had to leave. I mean, literally a few months later, he had to leave. And so he was really, really disappointed. In fact, if you look at pictures, I mean, I can't really describe them. They're black and white pictures, but I know which they are. Pictures of Prabhupada at that time. He's very skinny. He's very thin. And the reason is he couldn't eat because he was so heartbroken that his own disciples would do this, would conspire against him. He was so heartbroken he practically stopped eating. Anyway, so then Prabhupada went in front of the deities, and he actually said to Rukmini Dwarkadish, "Why are you taking me back to India? Because everyone there rejected me. Why are we going back there?" And the deities told Prabhupada, "Just wait, got something planned." So when Prabhupada went back to India, of course, it was just this extraordinary return of the hero, in the sense that thousands and millions of Indians welcomed him as this great soul, which he is, who had conquered the West. And so then Prabhupada understood that was Krishna's plan. So that part was very positive when Prabhupada went back to India, but there was this little problem that the Gaudiya Math, some branches, obviously not everyone, but a few branches of the Gaudiya Math had sort of orchestrated a conspiracy to remove Prabhupada and take ISKCON for themselves. And so at that point, I think you could say, obviously, ISKCON's relationship with the Gaudiya Math changed. At that point, I was still just a brahmachari, just dancing in the streets and everything, so I didn't know about this. And it didn't really concern me because I wasn't sent to India. Prabhupada, then when he went to India and saw this fantastic response, all the temples got this letter. Prabhupada said, "I want like 200 devotees, like now." And I was in Boston, and I wanted to go just because, I love adventure, and I thought, go to some new place. I was just in it for the adventure. But our temple, they decided that Giriraj would go, Giriraj Brahmachari, my good friend Giriraj. So he went and, of course, became a great preacher in India. But apart from that, to me, the movement in India, the Gaudiya Math, was just not part of my universe. It wasn't part of my world. I really had nothing to do with it. And so, I got married. I was Grihastha. I got married, and I was the president of ISKCON Gainesville, first president of ISKCON Gainesville, Florida, and then president of ISKCON Houston. And then in 1972, I took sannyas, and the GBC voted that I should, after I took sannyas, the GBC voted that I should go and preach in India. And when Prabhupada heard that, he said, "What? What's he going to do in India?" And the GBC wanted me to go there because I could quote Sanskrit. And Prabhupada said, "No, he should preach in America." So that was the end of that. And I had nothing to do with it. To me, India was just another planet. Of course, it's a holy land, Vrindavan, Mayapur, but it had nothing to do with my life. I don't think I knew a single Indian devotee. And I certainly didn't know anyone in the Gaudiya Math. It's just, I'd never met anyone from the Gaudiya Math. And so I just didn't think about it. I was doing my preaching program. So my first real experience of India, or the Gaudiya Math, was in 1974. I'm mentioning all this to show you that I don't think I was like by nature prejudiced or unfair or have some personal problem with them. Not at all. In 1974, Prabhupada organized the first Mayapur Vrindavan festival for Gaur Purnima. He actually, in October of 1973, he wrote a letter to Kirtananda, which we still have, saying that he wanted the GBC to meet in Mayapur, and every year, and that was the first GBC meeting in Mayapur. Before that, whenever Prabhupada felt he needed the GBC, he would just send letters out. We didn't use telephones back then. No one could make a long distance call. He just sent letters out, and he would call the GBC whenever he felt there was something important. He would just call them, and they would fly wherever Prabhupada was. There was no annual meeting. There was no place to have a meeting. But in 73, he said, now that we have land in Mayapur, we should have an annual meeting in Mayapur, and there should be an annual Gaur Purnima festival. So the first festival was in 1974. So I went, because Prabhupada said everybody should go. And the movement was so small back then. I mean, it was big, but it was small. That probably 90% of all the international devotees that went to the festival went on the same airplane. I mean, we were all very young, and in those days, to fly to Europe or India, you basically had to go to New York. It's not like nowadays. So, if you want to go to New York, Europe or India, go to New York. So we all met in New York, and we flew to London, picked up the English, British devotees, then it flew to Paris, that picked up the French devotees, and then then it flew to Frankfurt, picked up the German devotees. And this is Air India. This was like anyway, that was the route. Then flew to Rome and picked up the Italian devotees, and then flew to Beirut. Actually, you could fly to Beirut in those days. We didn't pick up any devotees there. And then we flew to Tehran, and also didn't pick up any devotees. And then flew to... And the movement was so... You have to understand, I mean, a historian, in order to be a competent historian, to really reconstruct what actually happened, you have to be able to put yourself back in that time. You have to be able to experience what it was like to be alive at that time. So we were all very young, very innocent, very vulnerable. And, for example, we went to Vrindavan. It's not like now. There's like 1,000 different programs and ashrams and mandirs, and everyone does their own shopping. And it wasn't like that. We all stayed in one place. Everyone stayed in one place, which was the Fogal ashram, because the Prabhupada's temple wasn't completed yet. And everyone went on the same buses to the same parikram places, and it's just everyone went everywhere together. No one ever went anywhere by themselves. And so the whole environment was highly protected. It was very simple. Everyone was young and innocent, and all they knew was Prabhupada. So that was my first experience of India. And then I heard Prabhupada. Actually, I would hear Prabhupada talking about the Gaudiya Math. But to me, it was at best sort of interesting from an academic perspective, because I had nothing to do with India. I didn't know anyone from India, and there were hardly any Indian devotees. The Hare Krishna movement in India with lots of Indian devotees, that came, at least maybe 15 years after Prabhupada disappeared. In those days, if you went to India and went to Hare Krishna temples, you only associated with Western devotees. There were no Indian devotees.
2 or 3.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
Gopal Krishna.
But Gopal Krishna joined in Canada. He was working for the Coca-Cola company. Yeah, Montreal. Actually, I went to his wedding, which obviously was not a lifelong arrangement. But so, in fact, Prabhupada, when Indira Gandhi, if you remember this, some of you are old enough to remember, Indira Gandhi declared emergency measures and basically declared herself a dictator in India. There was like a year or two, she just sort of took over the country. And Prabhupada requested and got a meeting with her when she was like the absolute ruler of India. And the whole purpose of the meeting for Prabhupada was to ask her to get visas for his Western devotees, because if he could not get visas for his Western devotees, ISKCON in India would collapse almost immediately, because there were so few Indian devotees. So anyway, that was the atmosphere. And as far as the Gaudiya Math, I'm trying to think when's the next time I had anything to do with them. I'd always heard, like Prabhupada has a famous purport where he said that When Bhaktisiddhanta left, they tried to appoint an acharya. That was a disaster. The movement disintegrated. I knew these things, but to me it was just like hearing like the fall of the Roman Empire or something. It was just some historical thing because it didn't really have anything to do with my personal life. I was in South America, in Latin America, in '74, Prabhupada made me GBC. So the first time I would say, had personal experience of the Gaudiya Mata was, two things happened. In 1976, I went to be Prabhupada's secretary in Mayapur the month before the GBC meeting. And Prabhupada never asked me to do any secretarial work. He just liked to talk to me. He would call me into his room and just tell me things. But he sent me around. He personally sent me around to the different Gaudiya Mata communities to invite his godbrothers to come and talk to him. And so I'd heard about this before, but that's when I really became personally very much aware that Prabhupada, he really wanted to reunite the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. That was a desire. I mean, he wanted to do that. He wanted to reunite the devotees so that they could work together. And so I went to all the different Gaudiya Mata communities and invited them. And then, I even went sometimes and brought them to Prabhupada. And I sat in the room for some of their discussions, or sometimes when they really had to kind of go at it, like godbrothers, Prabhupada would kick me out of the room, close the doors, and you'd hear them like, but they were, because they were brothers, they were talking to each other. And then afterwards, Prabhupada would kind of give me, a report, like this is what happened. And so that was my first real experience. And what Prabhupada kept telling me is that, first of all, Prabhupada's invitation to his godbrothers, and it was always this, it was never different, was that as you can see, Krishna is doing something amazing in ISKCON, something that Prabhupada himself never expected. Prabhupada himself was as surprised as anyone else that the Hare Krishna movement grew so quickly. And so he said, obviously this is Krishna, and it's spreading all over the world. And so why don't we work together? But his idea was, why don't you come and work with me? Become a part of our movement. And Prabhupada told them that you don't have to worry about anything, because basically, in Hare Krishna temples, whether it's ISKCON or Gaudiya Mata, there's always the issue of like paying the bills. That's always one of the traditional meditations of ashram residents. How do you pay the bills? So he told them, look, we're all elderly now. You don't have to worry about anything. I'll give you anything you want. You can fly around the world and preach. I'll give you a nice car. Just anything. Anything you want, I'll give you. But just come and work with us. Because this is what Krishna is doing now. And they all refused all the time, because Prabhupada invited them many times. And the reason they gave, because Prabhupada personally told me this many times, the reason they gave, they actually were kind of honest about it. They were honest about it because they'd known, they're god brothers. They knew each other for their whole lives. And so they told Prabhupada that we don't want to give up our positions. Like in my own mutt, I'm the acharya, and I'd rather basically be a big fish in a little pond and not a little fish in a big pond. And so then probably maybe the last experience I had with the Gaudiya Mata when Prabhupada was here was, I think maybe in 1976. I'd been with Prabhupada for a month, and everyone came for the festival. The GBC came, we had our meeting. And we were invited to go to Sridhar Swami's ashram, as we always used to say, across the river, like, someone's going across the river. They were having some festival around the time, it wasn't Gaur Purnima, but it was in the festival season, so they were having some kind of program, and they invited the GBC to come. So we all went there, and the program was in Bengali, and I didn't speak Bengali, which made it very interesting. A combination of being way too hot for me, because I can't take the heat, so it was like way too hot for me, and we were kind of in this crowded place, and I couldn't understand anything anyone was saying. So, in other words, I had a great time. And I was just kind of like, you know, the heat and, you know, the what do they call it? Diarrhea. What's the word in English? When you get diarrhea, it's called, my God. Anyway, I was sick, as I always was in India. Dysentery, yeah, dysentery. I had my traditional Indian dysentery, and it was very hot, and it was crowded, and I didn't know what anyone was saying, and I was just like that, still jet lagged. So anyway, finally it ended, and we took the boat back. And so as soon as we got back, Prabhupada called us to his room, because he'd heard that we'd gone there. He said, "What happened? What happened there? What did they say?" He was very concerned. And Tamal Krishna Goswami had recorded it, because he was like the great documenter. I mean, he documented everything. He kept every email he ever received in his life or sent out to anyone. He actually kept a copy, because you never know. And my attitude was, just delete everything, because we're going to die anyway. So, I mean, I do keep some things, but he couldn't believe that I deleted so much stuff. But anyway, so he had recorded the program, and then he had a little, cassette player, and so he put it on Prabhupada's desk and played it, and Prabhupada listened to it, and at a certain point he became very disturbed, and he said, "They are offending me. They're criticizing me." And it wasn't Sridhar Swami. It was someone who was just speaking. And he said, they're offending me. He was very disturbed. And then he said, "Never go back there again. Never go back there again." So I want to kind of have a little pause here, because of course, in 1977, Prabhupada actually left this world. So at the time that Prabhupada left, and then those who he had appointed as leaders, Prabhupada asked me to be on the GBC. I didn't really fight for it. What was my impression of ISKCON the Gaudiya Math? And I have to admit, and again, this is not a criticism of the Gaudiya Math, it's just that my impression as a 29-year-old guy who had never lived in India, and really, my impression was somewhat negative. And I think my negative impression was not because I was biased, or because I was envious or sectarian, or didn't want the Vaishnavas to be unified. It was just, I was just a young person, not very experienced. And basically, the only time I ever heard about the Gaudiya Math was because there was a conspiracy they were starting against Prabhupada, or they didn't want to work with ISKCON because they'd rather be in charge of their own projects, which, that's their right. Or because someone at a Gaudiya Math project was offending Prabhupada publicly. That's all I knew. So, and then Prabhupada's purport that they didn't follow Bhakti Siddhanta, they didn't form a governing body, and then the whole thing disintegrated. So, I'm not saying that's, obviously now I'm older, and some things I can understand that I couldn't understand then, but as a 29-year-old person trying to deal with the fact that Prabhupada had just left and being in charge of a huge part of the world, where we were being constantly attacked by devotees who were Western devotees who had joined the Gaudiya Math, and they were attacking us and trying to literally steal countries and temples, and that's a whole other story. It literally almost killed me, because I had to work so hard and travel so many places that I finally ended up actually in an ambulance in the middle of the night going to a hospital at the University of Florida, because it was just so much trying to defend ISKCON. But those were my experiences. Obviously, I didn't know everything. There were many Gaudiya Math gurus I'd never met. There were people, I'm sure, who were more favorable to Prabhupada that I'd never met. But that's what I knew. That's what I knew at that time. And so for me, based on, you could say, my limited knowledge, but some knowledge, the Gaudiya Math was something which was dangerous. which was more or less a constant threat, which had been a threat to ISKCON ever since 1970. And I took very seriously Prabhupada's statement not to criticize his godbrothers. I actually took that, I didn't criticize them because I understood that was not the Vaishnava etiquette. So I didn't criticize them, but to me it was just something to be very cautious with because it was always dangerous. Especially because, and again, I'm thinking now as a historian. I'm not going to conclude at the end of this that ISKCON did all the right things and ISKCON is, after Prabhupada, is completely innocent, because everyone knows that's not true. The simple fact, though, is that, I really had no other way. I had no other way to think about ISKCON. The Gaudiya Math. So then, but I was not sectarian. I really believe. For example, somehow or other, it's a whole story, I organized a team to finish Prabhupada's Bhagavatam. So when the first Bhagavatams were published, I sent a set of hardcover books to Sridhar Swami as a gift. And he was very appreciative, so I maintained a very good relationship with him. In fact, when he was about to pass away, we followed the Vaishnava etiquette that when a senior Vaishnava is going to pass away, that you go and visit him and you ask forgiveness for any offenses, conscious or unconscious, and it's a standard etiquette. And so 3 or 4 GBC were sent to Sridhar Swami. It's not a ritual to, sincerely ask forgiveness for any offenses, and I was a member of that group because everyone knew I had a good relationship with Sridhar Swami. So again, my general perception of the Gaudiya Math is something which is, you have to be very careful about, did not stop me from following etiquette and respecting senior Vaishnavas. And it's interesting what Sridhar Swami said to us when we went to see him. He was very happy. He really appreciated that we went there. And what I best remember is he became emotional with, Krishna conscious feelings, and he had tears in his eyes. With tears in his eyes, he begged us to keep ISKCON strong. And he said that all the Gaudiya Vaishnav groups ultimately depend on ISKCON. That's what he told us. Don't kill the messenger. But that's what Sridhar Swami said to us. And so then I went back to my normal position of having nothing to do with the Gaudiya Math because, I had nothing to do with them. And the next time actually in Italy, Eka Bhakti. What year was that when I went to see Puri Maharaj?
1997.
97. Puri Maharaj was traveling in Europe and initiating a lot of people, and after agreeing that he wouldn't initiate people, anyway, it's a story. But so when I was co-GBC of Italy, and I thought, well, I'll go talk to him. We should talk to each other. We should have dialogue and try to work things out. And then, actually, other leaders were opposed, isn't it? They didn't want me to go. Like, you shouldn't go there. You shouldn't talk to these people. But I decided, no, we should be nice. We should talk to people and try to work things out. So I went to see Puri Maharaj, and we had a nice meeting. Everything, was very nice and Krishna conscious. And, of course, for various reasons, it didn't work out in Italy, and there were a lot of problems. But not because of what I did. And then the next major problem was with Narayan Maharaj. And again, I was one of the main people in ISKCON that tried to work things out. And several times I went to see Narayan Maharaj, and again, to try to make peace. Like, let's figure this out. I was just very pragmatic. Like, whatever, let's just figure out a way to make peace. Let's see how we can get along with each other. We're all devotees. I went several times. He even came to visit me at my house in Los Angeles. And without any criticism, I just was unsuccessful. I could not get him to talk about making peace. he wouldn't talk about it. Every time I went to see him, he just refused to talk about it. In fact, when Prabhupada's godbrothers, Narayan Maharaj, of course, is obviously senior to me, but we're both disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta. So when I went there, I offered obeisances, I followed Vaishnava etiquette, I was very respectful. But when people in the Gaudiya Math would come to talk to Prabhupada, like, let's work things out, Prabhupada would send all his disciples out so they could just talk freely. But every time I went to see Narayan, he did exactly the opposite. He actually, we'd be sitting there talking, just him and I, maybe one of his disciples, and he would call everyone in, which made it impossible to talk, because they're sensitive topics. I really tried. For example, one time I went to Badger, California, which was, perhaps their main community in North America at the time. And I really thought, we're all devotees, we can work this out, we're all devotees. So they had a kirtan, and so I was dancing the kirtan, Narayan Maharaj was dancing the kirtan, and we were actually dancing together. And I was thinking, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, we can solve this. The next thing I know, a few weeks later, they take those pictures of Narayan Maharaj and I, dancing together in kirtan, and they this I think it started in San Diego, and they start taking these pictures around to my disciples, saying that your guru surrendered to Narayan Maharaj. Now you should be reinitiated by him. The reason I'm mentioning this is that ISKCON is not always at fault. There are actually a few times when it's not ISKCON's fault. And so I thought, Jesus, I just thought, now what do I do? So, like I have a very good friend, Guru Prasad Swami. I'm not saying ISKCON made mistakes. ISKCON certainly made mistakes. But the point is, it's not always all our fault. I have a godbrother who's a very close friend of mine, because when he was a brahmachari, I was his GBC and I'm his sannyas guru, which means that he really should send me regular donations. I've talked about that, but yeah, anyway, there's been a miscommunication there. So, if you know Guru Prasad Swami, he's really a nice guy. He's just, isn't he?
Yes.
He's just like what we call in America, long, tall Texan. And he's like really a nice guy. He's very gentle. He respects everyone. And so he was very upset about these problems between Narayan Maharaj and ISKCON. So he thought, well, I'm going to show that the whole problem is that, we're not offering him proper respect. So he invited Narayan Maharaj to come to his zone, and he worshipped him. He put him on the Vyasasana. He actually personally washed his feet and had him give class in his temples in Central America. And Narayan Maharaj reciprocated by reinitiating Guru Prasad's disciples. So, these are just there's a lot more stories very much like this. And I mentioned this, my intention is not to say that, to criticize. No, I'm just saying, what do you do? What do you do in a situation? You really don't know what to do. And then on ISKCON's side, and then maybe I'll talk about what I think ISKCON did wrong. Hey, the Russians are coming. ISKCON also could have handled it much better. At a certain point, leaders of ISKCON became convinced that there was a difficulty in the relationship with Narayan Maharaj. I believe that there were objective difficulties. I don't think it was our imagination, and I think that can be documented and demonstrated logically, that there were actually objective problems in terms of Narayan Maharaj's intentions toward ISKCON. But the GBC did not handle the situation well. They did not go to him, they didn't talk to him, They didn't do it right. And I was a member of the GBC, so I'm also responsible. Even though I'm often not inclined to criticize myself, but I have to admit that in this case, we really, really didn't do it right. In fact, there was a committee, a GBC committee delegated to go talk to him and do things nicely and properly with Vaishnava etiquette, and they didn't go. And one of the members of that committee is ultra-conservative, and, I won't go further than that, but they didn't go. And that was, I think, a major mistake, a major lack of etiquette, considering the fact that Narayan Maharaj had helped ISKCON in the past. For example, there was a court case in Bombay, which was very critical for ISKCON, and he went there and just, spent days there in the heat, waiting around these, horrible Indian courtrooms, testified on our behalf. So he'd really done service. He'd really done something for ISKCON. And when it came to the point where there had to be some kind of little distancing, and I think for very objective reasons, the GBC just did not do it properly. And that made things much worse. So again, I mention that because it would be ridiculous to say that everything ISKCON did was well done. Obviously, that's not the case. So now, and there, I could go on all day with stories, but I won't, for which you should all be very grateful. So, but the point is that now here we are, or as they say, nous voici. Here we are. And in France particularly, there's been a policy which toward the Gaudiya Math, which I don't entirely agree with. Some leaders of ISKCON think that we're never allowed to even imply that anything the managers of ISKCON do is not perfect. I don't think that's what Prabhupada intended. I think Prabhupada wanted a society of Brahmins, not of Shudras. And, I don't reject the GBC. I appreciate their service, but I think in this particular case, I'm not convinced personally that things were done in the best possible way. I'm not saying everything they did was wrong. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that at all. I'm sure they did some things right, but I'm not, as a member of ISKCON, I'm not entirely convinced that everything was done in the best possible way between ISKCON and the Gaudiya Math, for which, for having said that, now I'll probably get another summons or something, for doing what Prabhupada said, and that is being independently thoughtful. Prabhupada said that actually ISKCON exists to make devotees independently thoughtful, and so according to Prabhupada's instructions, I actually think I have a right to have my own view of things and to express it according to Vaishnava etiquette. So, but now, in terms of what can be done now, again, there's the history. But that I think we could put aside because we're supposed to be Vaishnavas, and we should all be able to say, forget the past, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, forget the past and let's just all be friends. I think the major problem, again, analyzing things as a historian, or as a student of religions, I think the major problem here is this. It was the first problem. The first real problem between ISKCON and the Gaudiya Math. When Prabhupada asked them to help and they didn't want to help, well, that was their right. Maybe we think that wasn't the wisest decision, but they have their own institution and it's their choice. They didn't have to help Prabhupada in New York. So that I think is, I could think, well, that wasn't a wise decision, but it's not like, it wasn't a major problem. The 1970 conspiracy was a major problem. And I would suggest that to some extent it still is. I think that original problem between ISKCON and the Gaudiya Math is still the problem, actually. It's never really been resolved. Because the original problem was the idea that Prabhupada has to be basically demoted. How do you say it in French?
Retrogradé.
Yeah, that Prabhupada, in other words, Prabhupada presented himself, I'm the founder acharya of ISKCON, but actually, no, you're not really the founder. You're not really the acharya of ISKCON. You need to be A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, because the acharya for all of us is Bhaktisiddhanta. Of course, from our point of view, Bhaktisiddhanta never offended his father, the great Acharya Bhaktivinoda, by becoming an Acharya. No one thinks that Bhaktisiddhanta offended his father because he became an Acharya. And similarly, I think it would be crazy to think that Prabhupada offended Bhaktisiddhanta by becoming, or simply by accepting what Krishna had done in making him an Acharya. So the reason I think this is still the problem, and by saying it's a problem, I don't mean to say that devotees in France or anywhere else in the world who are in the Gaudiya Math are conspiring against ISKCON. That's not what I mean. I don't actually think that's true. What I mean is that it seems that always the terms of unity, like, okay, if you want unity, this is what you have to do. And the condition for unity still seems to be that Prabhupada is not ultimately the Acharya for this age, and especially for the Western world. It's actually Bhaktisiddhanta. And whenever I've been approached, like, okay, let's unite, there's some kind of international Vaishnava organization, different attempts with different names, that's the way it's going to be. That let's all work together. We'll have a single movement, but Prabhupada needs to take a step down. And he's certainly Prabhupada. We respect him, but he's just one of the Gaudiya Math gurus, and there's others on his level. And of course, the idea that other Gaudiya Math gurus, whom I personally, I think I've never disrespected, I've always offered my obeisances to them. I've given them gifts. I've always sincerely respected them as senior Vaishnavas. But it seems that you see it visually, because you go to temples, you see on the altar, Prabhupada is just one of the Gaudiya Math gurus. In a sense, he is one of the Gaudiya. He is one of the gurus that came from Bhaktisiddhanta. That's true. But at the same time, Prabhupada, his self-understanding. How did Prabhupada see himself in the Gaudiya Vaishnava world? And we have overwhelming evidence of how Prabhupada saw himself, because whenever Prabhupada presented himself to important people, like really important people, and he said, okay, happy to meet you, this is who I am, or what did he put on the covers of his books? Prabhupada never presented himself on his book covers or to important people as, I'm the Diksha Guru of ISKCON. So seeing Prabhupada as simply a Diksha Guru, that's not the way he saw himself. That's not the way he presented himself. He always said, I am the founder Acharya of ISKCON. And that specific term, samstapik Acharya, means you're the Acharya, capital A. Prabhupada wanted all of us to be Acharyas, actually, but, small a. So I personally believe that we should do everything possible to establish better relationships with all Gaudiya Vaishnavas, whatever they belong to. And I strongly support that. I've always been, in fact, very inspired by the idea of uniting all the Vaishnavas. What if all the Vaishnavas in the world? What if everybody from South India, the follower of the Sri Sampradayas, or all these Vaishnavas could actually work together? That would be so wonderful. It'd be so powerful. But again, following Prabhupada, and Prabhupada's own vision of what unity would look like. Because Prabhupada had a very clear, specific idea of how to establish unity. And as a follower of Prabhupada, that's who I am. As a follower of Prabhupada, I have to follow his plan. And not only I follow Prabhupada's plan because it's his plan, but also, I have to say, as a scholar who studied the history and sociology of religions, I believe Prabhupada's plan is actually rational. I think it's rational. And also because he's the one who actually displayed, by far, I mean, without comparison, the empowerment to bring Krishna to the Western world. And also, and this may be the last point I'll make, and then we can discuss or have questions or donations. Skip the questions, get right to the donations. And that is, I'm actually kidding. I guess in ISKCON you have to say that. I'm kidding. But what really attracted me to the Hare Krishna movement, I can tell you right now, it wasn't the stylish dress. It wasn't the shaved head. They shaved me up involuntarily. They tricked me into cutting my hair. So, but what really attracted me, it wasn't even the chutney. What really inspired me was a spiritual science. I personally was not looking for a religion. I already had one. It wasn't maybe, a complete spiritual science, but it was nice. I experienced God in the religion of my family. I went to the place of worship. I definitely experienced God. We sang songs glorifying God, which is the Yuga Dharma. For this, it's the Yuga Dharma. And I really had ecstatic moments glorifying God as a young man, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I definitely felt the presence of God in the place of worship. So I wasn't looking for a religion. And I was even comfortable kind of like in the ethnic trappings of my birth religion, certain kinds of food and certain songs and dances. I liked it. I still like it, actually. I still really like it. So I wasn't looking for a religion. I didn't have like a traumatic childhood and I wanted to escape into some other culture or I wanted some new ethnic identification. I was born in a place, if you look at what Prabhupada, I was born in Los Angeles. And if you look at what Prabhupada says about Los Angeles, you type in Veda-based Los Angeles, like most of the time he's saying, boy, it's great weather in Los Angeles. Because it never gets too hot or too cold usually. And so I had a wonderful family. I mean, my parents, they didn't make the Vaishnav curve. But I had really, really loving parents, like really affectionate, loving parents. And we lived in nice neighborhoods, and the weather was great. California. And so I really was not looking for okay, I want to get away from my past. I want to, now identify with a different culture. That's not what I was looking for, believe me. I was looking for a spiritual science because I knew there was a God. And I thought, like George Harrison says actually in his little foreword to the Krishna book that he financed, if there's a God, I want to meet him. I really want to know you. I really want to go with you. From that song, My Sweet Lord. So that's what I wanted, a spiritual science. And I still do, actually. Which is one of the reasons why I'm universally admired in ISKCON today. Especially by conservative leaders who feel that I'm something like the anti-Krishna. So, and actually, I have a direct instruction from Prabhupada to do this. I win. I have because the first letter I wrote to Prabhupada, it was 1969. My God. That was 48 years ago. So I was 1 year old. I crawled into the temple. That's why I joined the movement. Just kidding. So that was in 1969, and I was a student. I was a student at the University of California in Berkeley, which then and now is the #1 public university in the United States, and generally considered the best public university in the world. And they have dozens of Nobel laureates. It's Berkeley. So I was a student at Berkeley, and devotees were saying I should go out on Sankirtan all the time and, save the world by giving people incense and taking their money. So I wrote a letter to Prabhupada and I asked him, should I go on Sankirtan and just do service or should I stay in school? And I was living in the temple. And I did not in any way indicate in my letter that I really want to stay in school. In fact, it was the opposite. I just I was burnt out. So Prabhupada wrote to me and said, stay in school. He said, I want you to get a good education so that you can preach to similarly educated people. That's what Prabhupada wrote to me. That was his first instruction. And just as Prabhupada, his first instruction from his guru became the purpose of his life, so I can say that first instruction from Prabhupada became the purpose of my life. And Prabhupada didn't say, just read my books. He said, get a good education. Now, if I want to know what God is, if I want to know what the soul is, yeah, I'm just going to read Prabhupada's books. But to understand how to speak to, how to deal with educated people, it's different. So, what I've done in Krishna West and so on is simply trying to find the spiritual science, which sometimes has to be excavated under layers of superstition and sort of mythological views. And by mythological, I don't mean that, Krishna is a myth. That's not at all what I mean. What I mean is, Krishna is there, the soul is there, but for example, having the idea that somehow current Indian ethnic customs, like for example dressing in certain ways, or eating certain kinds of foods, or playing certain kinds of music, that's eternal Vedic culture, for which there's no evidence in any Shastra or in history. And Prabhupada himself says, this is a direct quote from Prabhupada, we do not care about dress. Dress is a dead thing. We are interested in consciousness. I've compiled pages and pages of quotes from Prabhupada, not only accepting what I'm doing, but actually urging us to do it. But of course, that part of Prabhupada has sort of been forgotten. And I'm trying to remind everyone. That's Prabhupada. So anyway, in doing that, I'm just trying to carry out Prabhupada's instruction. I'm trying to come up with an intelligent, rational understanding of Krishna consciousness. And in terms of relationships with the Gaudiya Math, to me, honestly, it's not like I have some emotional investment in this, like, okay, Gaudiya Math, you've done me wrong, which is sort of ungrammatical cowboy English. Anyway, you did this to me, you hurt me now. No, I have nothing like that. I have no emotional interest in it. I have no emotional investment whatsoever. I'm just trying to figure out what is reasonable, what is fair. That's all. What's fair, what's reasonable. And because there is great value in unity. So, so here's the point. Okay, now I remember what I said. See that? At my age, I can still remember what I was thinking of. And that is the spiritual science. To me, having Prabhupada at the center of the Gaudiya Vaishnava world, which obviously, it's everyone's choice. I can't force people to do that. But having Prabhupada at the center of the Gaudiya Vaishnava world is scientific. It's a spiritual science. It's not a sentiment. For example, I had really nice parents, and so naturally my love was for my parents because they were my parents, or my brothers. So I couldn't say objectively that my family, these were the greatest people that ever lived on earth, and that's scientific. I really like them, but I don't know if I would try to scientifically argue that. But because it's my family, I have special feelings for them. So some people think, well, Prabhupada's your Diksha Guru, so you have a special sentiment for Prabhupada. Every disciple thinks that my guru's it's like child psychology. My mommy and daddy are God. Or, it's like infant psychology, child psychology. Every child thinks my parents are the greatest parents. I don't think I'm doing that. I don't think I'm intellectually a child, first of all. And that would be silly. It would be ridiculous for me to go around the world trying to convince people to accept Prabhupada just because he's my guru. I wouldn't do that. I would just find it silly. But the reason I'm saying that Prabhupada, in my view, is the natural acharya at least certainly for the Western mission, and perhaps the Indian mission, is because I think Krishna demonstrated that he is the acharya. And it's very interesting because there's two approaches to evaluating the guru, like is this a real guru or is this an advanced guru? I think one way is scientific and one way is, frankly, a little silly. I mean, it's not, well, let me tell you what I mean so you know what I'm talking about. Now, let's say you meet someone and that person really changes your life. You meet a guru, whatever institution they belong to. They can belong to anything. But that person really gets to you, really speaks to you, and it really makes a difference in your life. Then obviously, you could say that's your guru because that person, somehow Krishna revealed to you that this person is really helping you. But, like for example, my parents did so many, I feel the older I get, the more grateful I am to my parents for what they did for me. However, when you're talking about spiritual science, if I want to say my guru because my guru did so much for me, therefore this is the guru of the universe, or Jagat Guru, or my guru is as good as anybody's guru, at that point, I'm making a statement which is not merely private, it's public, it's not merely individual, it's social. It's one thing to say, I'm an individual, I have free will, in my personal life, this is what works for me. I mean, who can argue with that? I mean, how can I tell you that, no, that's not true? But when I take the next step and I say, okay, it not only works for me, but, this is really the best guru for everyone, at that point, you're making a public claim. And therefore, at that point, you have to come up with some kind of objective evidence. I don't need objective evidence to say, my love is for my parents. But if I want to tell other people, like, you should love my parents, not your parents, my parents, at that point, I take on the burden of providing evidence. I have to give a reasonable, objective argument or evidence about why that is true. So, if you want a spiritual science, some people don't want a spiritual science. Some people just love, Krishna consciousness, or they like the whole culture of it, and that's it. Personally, I need a spiritual science. That's what I need personally, and I want to teach a spiritual science. That's what I want to teach. And so therefore, for me, if I say this is a bona fide guru or this is an advanced guru, I have a responsibility to the public to give them a reason. Why is that true? How can I prove that? So it's interesting, when Prabhupada, in one of his books, he talks about a first-class guru, like there's first class, second class, third class. He said the first-class guru has 3 symptoms. One is that I think he used the word uttamadikari, that a first-class guru knows the scriptures very well. Because if you have a guru and you ask him a question and he says, God, I can't figure that out. I don't know. That's not first class. So a first class guru should really know Shastra, scriptures. And a first class guru should follow the Shastras because, guru can be a big scholar, but he smokes and drinks and, he's gotten 3 women pregnant in the last 3 years. So, that also, you could say, yeah, but he knows Sanskrit. So a first-class guru should know Shastra, but also follow. And the third thing is, a first-class guru should actually be willing to do the job. Because, what if someone knows scriptures very well, Shastra, practices it, but just doesn't have time for you? Like, I'm sorry, I just don't like to talk to people. Or, I don't know, it makes me tired, or I don't have time, or... I want to just go chant Hare Krishna, stay away from me. Clearly, so if you have someone that knows Shastra very well, and follows Shastra, and actually likes to help other people, then Prabhupada said that's a first-class guru. Now, all 3 of these qualifications have something in common which makes this definition scientific. And that is, all three of these qualities are observable. Any neutral, reasonable person can actually observe to see if a person has these qualities. In other words, does this person actually know Scripture? You can test the person. In fact, you should test a guru. That's called pariksha in Sanskrit, which literally means looking all around. Because pari is Greek or French peri, like peripherique, like, the road that goes around. So peri in Greek is just Sanskrit pari, around. And then iksha means looking, like investigating. So when you sort of completely investigate, that's called pariksha, which is translated as testing or examining. So you can find that out. If you're reasonably intelligent, you can find out if the guru really knows Shastra. And Krishna recommends that in the Gita. Tadvidhi pranipatena, pariprashnena, same word pari. Krishna says pariprashna. Prashna means question. That don't accept a guru until you really satisfied yourself. Ask questions. So, you can find out if a guru knows Scripture. You can find out if the guru really practices, because by some magical arrangement of Krishna, like spiritual leaders in ISKCON that cheat always get discovered. It's just somehow or other they're just always at the wrong place at the wrong time. So, but basically, you can go and stay with the person, you can stay near them. In fact, interestingly, the word, Sanskrit word for serving or worshiping is upasana, which literally means staying near a person. Upa-asana. Anyway, I'll get into all the grammar later. But so you can actually go and you can observe a guru. Is this person really practicing spiritual life? Does this person have bad habits? You can find out. You can't fool all the people all the time. And then, is the guru willing to talk to you? Is the guru willing? Because, it's like having children. Some people don't want to have children. It's like too much for them. And some people have children and love them and take care of them, and those are the good parents. So, is a particular guru willing to be a good parent? You can find that out. So all these three qualifications you can observe, and therefore it can be part of a spiritual science because the claims can be tested. Now, if I say, let's say one of my disciples, who, I pride myself on their blind allegiance, and that, they never confuse themselves by anything like an independent thought. So, but let's say, I'm kidding. So let's say one of my disciples says to you, and this would be very embarrassing for me, but let's say one of my disciples says to you that, oh, you should accept my guru because he's with Krishna, and he's dancing with Krishna. Oh, really? Well, how do you know that? We can just see it. We can see it in his eyes. And what do you do with that? What do you do with a statement like that? You can't prove it's true. You can't prove it's not true. So what do you do with it? My point is, saying that this is the real guru because, he loves Krishna so much. Loving Krishna you can sort of test, because as Prabhupada said to the Beatles, when they asked him, how do you know who a real guru is? Prabhupada said, you have to see who's addicted to Krishna. It's like you were a kid in school. If you had a crush on somebody, usually people found out because you were like, always looking at the person or always talking about them. And so, when you're a kid in school, everyone knows who has a crush on somebody else, who really is. So Prabhupada said, but there are many gurus in the world, in this or that institution, who appear to be basically serving Krishna, talking about Krishna. So if we want to say that this person is really the guru, this is the acharya, and if you base that claim on some internal thing, like he's with Krishna, he's dancing with the gopi, you can't prove it or disprove it, therefore it cannot be a spiritual science. It cannot be. And so when you build a whole institution based on claims about a leader that cannot be tested, that are not objective, in the sense that it's someone's opinion, how can that institution truly be a spiritual science? So that's my concern. My conviction that Prabhupada, as he himself believed, that it is Krishna's intention that Prabhupada be the acharya, the main acharya for the modern Krishna consciousness movement, or movement, to me it's scientific. To me it's scientific, because Prabhupada frankly did more than everybody else put together. I mean, there's no one did anything like what Prabhupada did. Especially if you put in a further condition that an acharya proves its potency not by going and kind of reinvigorating people that were already made devotees by somebody else, but do what Prabhupada did. You know, it's a big world out there. And that's why I personally find it so boring and like ridiculous to go and try to get involved in little, battles and fights between devotees or Gaudiya Math or ISKCON. To me, it's like, are you serious? Because, meanwhile, in the real world out there, no one gives a damn about the Krishna consciousness movement. I mean, take France. I mean, this is a very important country. It's an amazing country. France has been a leading country in the world for over 1,000 years. Actually, about 1,500 years, even earlier. Julius Caesar made his career in France. It was by beating up people in France and then beating up Germans that tried to invade France. That's how he became the emperor, the Roman Empire. Anyway, but after the fall of the Roman Empire, as you may know, the first region of the former empire to reunite and become a powerful nation state was France. It was France. I mean, the borders weren't exactly the same. So, and that was like 1,500 years ago. So for 1,500 years, this has been a very important country. And it's really about France. It's not about us. It's not about I want this or I like that or you want that or you like this. That's ridiculous. It's about France. It's about saving France. And I think the only thing the French people will ever even dream of accepting from us is a spiritual science. I mean, as I was saying in Dijon, anyone who thinks that it's possible to culturally colonize France with an Asian culture really needs urgent psychiatric care. I mean, if you know anything about France, I can say myself that for the last 3 years, actually, every day, I've watched all the news about France on France 24, in French from Paris. And so I have some idea of what's going on here. Because I have 3 years studying France. Because it seems to me, how could I go to France and think I could try to help France if I don't know about it? Maybe because I'm a guru and everything.
Do you need mine? Because now the light has come back.
Oh, thank you.
You want mine?
Merci beaucoup.
Do you need a microphone?
Yes, it will actually make me feel more important.
So?
Yeah, merci.
You want mine?
Si. Allons-y. So, the French people are intelligent. I mean, not all of them, we know Varnashram. But there are a lot of intelligent people in this country. And my personal opinion, as a student of history and just observing European affairs for several years every day, I think France is actually going to become more and more important in the near future because of various reasons, economic, political, and so on going on in the world. So, I can hold it also. So anyway, that's my concern, spiritual science. I think only a spiritual science can interest the people of this country. And to me it's scientific that Krishna has revealed Prabhupada as... Thank you, merci beaucoup. Oui. So...
She's going to put it.
Oh. This is a type of empowerment. Microphone avesh. Attention, madame.
You want to try?
Hello? This is so empowering. So, any questions? Perhaps I'll stop here. I mean, yes, Narottama Dasa.
I have one question. How do you define the spiritual science? And when we talk about
How do we what?
How do you define the spiritual science? And when we talk about
Spiritual science.
Science, yes. And when we talk about Vedic culture, what is the difference between modern Vedic culture when we deal with ISKCON? They always use this term Vedic culture, Vedic culture. So what is the difference between our Vedic culture and spiritual science?
Okay. I paid him to ask that question. First of all, let's talk about the word Vedic. The word Vedic, actually the English word Vedic, French Vedique, comes from Sanskrit. Not only the word Veda, but the way you form an adjective out of a noun. Because in Sanskrit, you can form an adjective by adding the K sound. Ka. So therefore in Sanskrit it's Vaidik. Vaidika. And French Vedique, English Vedic. So how is this word used in Shastra? Because Prabhupada says that although there's Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra as authorities, the central authority is Shastra. Prabhupada said that repeatedly. The central authority is Shastra. In fact, Prabhupada said that's what distinguishes our movement from so many religions around the world. We actually have the Shastra. So what does Shastra say about Vedic? First, let's look at two Shastras. Bhagavatam and then the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which of course is much later. In the Bhagavatam, the word Vedic in the Bhagavatam, the word Vedic is used, ironically, the way mundane scholars use it, and not the way we use it. In the Bhagavatam, the word Vedic is used in contrast to Tantric, because we actually have two sources of knowledge. We have two sources of knowledge in the Bhagavatam, in our tradition, which are Vaidic and Tantric. And by Vaidika, the Bhagavatam means the Shruti literature, the original Vedas, the Upanishads, the literature that scholars call Shruti, or even Hindus, as opposed to Smriti. But we also take knowledge from Tantra. For example, in the Bhagavatam, in the first canto, third chapter, when it lists the incarnations, Narada Muni is listed as an incarnation because he gave to the world Vaishnav Tantra. Vaishnav Tantra. Like the Narada Pancharatra. So, for example, our knowledge of Vaikuntha, the spiritual worlds, our knowledge of deity worship, our knowledge that Krishna expands himself into other forms like Baladev, Vasudev, Sankarshan. Hare Krishna. Aloha.
C'est mieux tard que jamais.
Ah!
Mieux tard que jamais.
Oui. Hare Krishna. Merci. Mieux tard que jamais. Yes. So, better late than never. So, the word Vedic is not used as an all-encompassing term for a whole culture that includes Vedic dress, Vedic cuisine, Vedic architecture, Vedic music. It just means a body of literature as opposed to Tantra. So a lot of the knowledge that we have in the Bhagavatam and that we teach is not in the Vedas, in the sense of the Shruti literature. In fact, the Brahma Samhita, which Lord Chaitanya personally gave us, says, Vedeshu Durlabham. It is hard to find Krishna in the Vedas. Vedeshu Durlabham. Even though Krishna says, by all the Vedas I am to be known. So he's hard to find, but if you read other literatures like the Bhagavatam, then you can find Krishna in the Vedas. So that's how the word Vedic is used in the Bhagavatam. It's used to mean a certain specific body of literature which is often called Shruti. Now, how is the word Vedic used in the Chaitanya Charitamrita? There, it's used in an even more limited way. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, you find the word Vaidika, Vedic, but it's always used in the compound word Vaidika Brahmana. Vaidika Vedic Brahman, which means there a karma kanda, ritualistic Brahman that performs the kinds of rituals that Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita are not going to get, they won't get you very far down the road. So, and that's it. That's how the word Vedic is used. Now, the idea, when we, as Western people, whether you're French or American or, whatever, when you hear the word culture, like Vedic culture, first of all, if we ask, what's the Sanskrit word for culture? That's a very difficult question. The term Vedic culture is not in the Vedas. The term Vedic culture is not in the Bhagavatam. It's not in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So what do we do? I mean, what we're doing now, in a sense, is called hermeneutics. It's an academic word that comes from Hermes, the messenger of the gods. It's the idea of how do you interpret, how do you understand scriptures? What is literal? What is allegorical? What is, how do you understand it? So we're trying to understand. So if we have an English term, Vedic culture, or the French culture védique, or in any language, we have Vedic culture, and it's not in Shastra. It's Vedic. We have a term Vedic culture, but it's not in the Vedas. It's not even in the Tantra literature. It's not in the Bhagavatam. So what do we do with that term? And yet the acharyas have used it. Hermeneutically speaking, in other words, having a reasonable way to understand sacred words, the word Vedic culture is fine if you give to that term a definition that is in the Shastra. I mean, we can use thousands of new terms if the definitions come from Shastra. If we have a non-Shastra term with a non-Shastra definition, you just went down the rabbit hole with Alice. I mean, you're just like, where are you? Où êtes-vous? Non-Shastra term with a non-Shastra definition. It has no connection. So now the point I've tried to make is that among devotees, they tend to give a non-Shastra definition to a non-Shastra term, whereas I'm giving a Shastra definition to the term. The non-Shastra definition is this, that just like if we say culture française, French culture, or Mexican culture, or Bavarian culture, or, I don't know, Cajun culture in New Orleans. Anyway, that we're talking about, if you say, like, for example, you say la culture française, everyone understands a very famous cuisine, a certain savoir-faire, or a certain type of architecture. Like, I love historic French villages. It's just, I really love because we don't have any historic villages in America. And so I really love it when I come to Europe. And architecture, literature, I mean, there are many great authors in French, but I guess my favorites are Hugo and Dumas, Le Comte de Monte Cristo, Les Miserables. So, it means a certain culture, a way of eating, even a way of dressing, architecture, and so on. And so when you hear Vedic culture, when a Western person hears Vedic culture, they tend to think, as I think most devotees think, that there is Vedic architecture, there is Vedic cuisine, there is Vedic music, there is Vedic dress. Even if it comes from Muslims, it's still Vedic. Or, for example, Vedic cuisine. I mean, like, you should only offer to Krishna the preparations that he likes. I mean, who would have guessed that Krishna is so fond, who likes so much Turkish food? There's a big surprise because, half the preparations, which are the only ones Krishna likes, anyway, that's where they come from. So, or for example, Krishna wants sabjis with, potatoes and tomatoes and chili, none of which existed in India when Krishna was here. Even as Lord Chaitanya, it actually comes from the Western Hemisphere and was brought by the Europeans. So, or Vaishnav dress, like a kurta, which is a Muslim word for a Muslim shirt. So what I'm trying to say is we really don't have evidence in Shastra that there is such a thing as Vedic architecture, Vedic cuisine. What we do find is a serious concern with two things in terms of your external culture. The way you dress, the way you eat, where you live. There's actually concern with two things. Number one, it should be in the mode of goodness, sattva guna. Sattva pradhan. So, in other words, when you eat food, Krishna doesn't say, think of me, eat like me, dress like me. What Krishna actually... So Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he analyzes, as examples, the major aspects of a normal human life. How you work, and what you eat, and your motives, and how you think, and so on. And he's teaching us it's sattva gun that you should... So, for example, among people who are maybe sincere but not entirely rational, if you wear, let's say if a woman wears a sari, that's Krishna conscious, even if it's she's wearing the sari in such a way that she really belongs not in a temple, but maybe on a stage in Las Vegas. Where you can expose a lot of your body, but it's Vedic, because whereas if a woman wears Western clothes, which are actually quite chaste and nice, that's Maya somehow. And so the problem with identifying spiritual science with an ethnic tradition, number one, you are disagreeing with Krishna. And number two, it's just not scientific. So if I say that a man or a woman should dress in sattva gun, it means I wear clothes that are decent, that are clean, that are appropriate. For example, if you go to a house of God, which actually in the Vedas is called Deva Griha, house of God. If you go to a house of God, show respect. And my mother taught me that. It's not that I learned that, from Vedic culture. My mother taught me that. When you went to the place of worship, you dress properly. So you get all these really intelligent questions. Well, if I don't wear a dhoti, it means I can wear like a male bikini or something. No. Because what Krishna teaches in the Gita is mode of goodness. So, for example, people offer things to the deity, which according to Krishna, food, are in the mode of passion. Like very spicy. Krishna specifically says spicy food, hot food, is in the mode of passion. And yet you have devotees thinking that you can offer this passionate food to Krishna because it's an Indian recipe, but you can't offer food and goodness to Krishna because it came from the West. That's not a spiritual science. That's called ethnic chauvinism. The technical word is ethnic chauvinism. Whereas what I'm interested in is a spiritual science. So, and ironically, the Indians don't even get into this. And they're not even like that. They actually are much more open and liberal. It's the new converts. It's the Western devotees who tend to be fanatical about this. The Indians aren't fanatical about this. It's the Western people who are kind of, they say what do they say? Don't try to be more Catholic than the Pope. But anyway, so if you look at Bhagavad Gita, the actual spiritual science is very simple. Live a life in sattva gun and offer it to Krishna. So those are the two things that Krishna teaches. Live in goodness and offer your life to Krishna. Offer food and goodness to Krishna and then eat it. Your dress, everything about your life, your music, it should be sattva gun, mode of goodness, and offered to Krishna. When sattva, goodness, becomes offered to Krishna, it becomes shuddha sattva, purified goodness, which in Vaishnava philosophy means the spiritual platform. I mean, think about this. The word which is used in Vaishnava philosophy for the spiritual platform is shuddha sattva, or vishuddha sattva, which means, some people have the impression that, okay, the material mode of goodness, prakrita sattva gun, is just, it's material. Whereas Krishna consciousness is like completely different. No, actually it's not. The spiritual platform is that same sattva guna, but offered to Krishna. And therefore, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita 4:24, Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagna, Brahmanahutam, that when you offer something to the absolute, that offering takes on the same absolute nature. It's spiritualized. So that basically is Krishna's program for planet Earth. Take things in goodness, offer them to God, and then live a life in purified goodness. That's the program. And to just pile on top of this, to bury the simple science, just bury it under all these ethnic requirements, is a great way to make sure that your movement fails in the Western world. It's a very efficient way to guarantee that the Hare Krishna movement will never really grow, will never really become important, will never really embody the Yuga Dharma for a significant number of people. So that's my shtick, as they say. That's what I've been teaching, of course. I believe it's rational. I believe it's based on Shastra. And, if it's not, someone really needs to show me very quickly that this is not really what Krishna's teaching. Any other question? I see you know your rational self-interest, and there is food on the table. So, thank you all very much. I appreciate your coming. Je suis reconnaissant que vous tous sont venus ici. Que vous êtes venus ici. Et merci pour votre attention. Hare Krishna.
Les livres dont vous
yes.
au tout début.
Yeah, go ahead.
Les livres sont disponibles. Le premier en anglais, la Bhagavad Gita, la traduction de Vedism Maharaj, avec une explication thématique. Et le deuxième, un livre que je vous suggère aussi beaucoup, c'est Quest for Justice, les histoires les plus pertinentes du Mahabharata.
I'm really happy to see you.
Yeah,
Here, take this.
Oh, thank you. That's your color.
It's actually matching. Like
Yeah.
you're really getting into Parisian fashion. Aren't you? Oui.